The desert heat pressed down on Ouagadougou like a heavy blanket as Ibrahim Traoré stood at the window of the presidential palace, watching the city come alive in the early morning light. 6 months into his presidency, he had gained the trust of many citizens, but the threats from both within and beyond Burkina Faso's borders remained constant. The country's continued struggles with insurgent groups and economic challenges weighed heavily on his mind. Yet there was another concern that had been growing quietly in recent weeks. "Colonel, the ministers are assembled," said Captain Moussa Zoungrana, his most trusted aide. Traoré nodded and adjusted his red beret, a symbol of his military background and the revolution that had brought him to power. The weekly cabinet meeting was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes, but today's agenda would remain in his mind only. For 3 months now, he had been secretly gathering information, watching patterns, and connecting seemingly unrelated events that pointed to something more sinister than mere incompetence or bureaucratic inefficiency. "Your coffee, sir," said a palace attendant, placing a steaming cup on the desk. "Thank you," Traoré replied, watching as the attendant left the room. He didn't touch the cup. Instead, he pulled out a small electronic device from his pocket, swept it over the beverage, and waited. No alert. He had taken to checking his food and drink regularly after intelligence suggested multiple foreign powers would benefit from his removal. Satisfied, he took a sip and gathered his papers. The cabinet room was an austere space, reflecting the military nature of the transitional government. 14 ministers sat around an oval table, their faces a mixture of ambition, concern, and for some, fear. As Traoré entered, they rose in respect. He gestured for them to sit and took his place at the head of the table. "Good morning," he began, his voice measured. "Before we discuss today's agenda, I want to thank each of you for your service to Burkina Faso during these challenging times." His eyes moved deliberately from face to face, studying reactions. "Our people expect results, not excuses. They demand security, not promises. And they deserve leaders who serve their interests, not foreign masters." A subtle tension filled the room. Finance Minister Marcel Koné shifted in his seat, while Foreign Affairs Minister Karamoko Traoré, no relation to the president, maintained an impassive expression. For the next hour, they discussed routine matters: security operations against jihadist insurgents in the north, economic recovery plans, and diplomatic initiatives with neighboring countries. Throughout, Traoré observed, not just words, but micro-expressions, subtle exchanges of glances, and who avoided certain topics. "Finally," said Traoré, "I would like updates on Project Sunlight." There was no such project, at least not officially. It was a name he had invented for this very meeting. "Project Sunlight, sir?" asked Defense Minister Kassoum Koulibaly, confusion evident in his voice. "Yes, the infrastructure initiative we discussed last month," Traoré replied casually, watching as 5 ministers exchanged quick glances. Interior Minister Apollinaire Joachimson Kayelem opened his mouth slightly before closing it again without speaking. "I believe that falls under my ministry's purview," said Infrastructure Minister Adama Luke Sorgo slowly. "If you could remind me of the specific details." Traoré smiled thinly. "No matter. We'll discuss it privately later." Meeting adjourned. As the ministers filed out, he called, "Minister Kayelem, Minister Sorgo, and Minister Karamoko, please stay behind." When the doors closed, leaving just the 4 men in the room, Traoré remained silent for a long moment. The 3 ministers waited, tension visible in their postures. "Gentlemen," he finally said, "I've been reviewing some interesting reports. Information about our military positions near the Mali border was leaked last week. A shipment of medical supplies was diverted, and financial transactions approved by this government have found their way to accounts in Zurich. He paused. What connects these events? The three ministers looked at each other nervously. Foreign Affairs Minister Karamoko was the first to speak. With respect, Colonel President, I'm not aware of any such connection. No, Traoré asked, sliding a folder across the table. These phone records suggest otherwise. The color drained from Karamoko's face as he glanced at the documents. Sir, I can explain. Save it. Traoré cut him off. You're not under arrest. Yet, I need information more than I need scapegoats. His voice hardened. Who are you working for? The three men remained silent, but their faces told different stories. Fear, calculation, and in Minister Sorgo's case, resignation. I thought as much, Traoré said, standing. You're dismissed for now, but understand this, I am watching. Every call, every meeting, every transaction. President Sankara was betrayed by those close to him. I will not make the same mistake. After they left, Captain Zungrana entered. Was it as you suspected, sir? Worse, Traoré replied. It's not just a few corrupt officials. We're facing a network, and I need to know how deep it goes. That night, in a secure room beneath the presidential palace, Traoré met with a small team of trusted military officers and intelligence analysts. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and maps connected by red string, 6 months of painstaking intelligence work. What we're looking at, explained Major Issouf So, head of military intelligence, is a sophisticated network embedded within our government. Some are motivated by money, others by ideology or tribal loyalties. But they all report to handlers outside our borders. France? Asked Traoré, referencing the former colonial power with which relations had grown increasingly strained. Some, yes, So confirmed. But not only France. We've identified connections to American intelligence, Russian private military contractors, and even Chinese economic interests. This isn't a single conspiracy, it's multiple foreign powers maintaining networks of influence. Captain Zungrana pointed to a portion of the wall dedicated to financial flows. The pattern suggests these networks predate your presidency, sir. They've been in place for years, possibly decades. When you took power, they simply adapted. Traoré studied the evidence before him. The networks touched every ministry, every level of government. Military officers, civil servants, even his personal staff. Trust, already a scarce commodity in his position, now seemed almost impossible. We need to move carefully, he said finally. If we strike too soon or too broadly, we risk destabilizing the entire government. If we move too slowly, they'll realize we're onto them and go deeper underground. There's something else, sir, said Major So, hesitating. We've identified coded communications suggesting an operation planned for next month. We don't know the details yet, but the language matches patterns we've seen before planned coups. Traoré's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced. A coup, always the sword hanging over any African leader who challenged the status quo. He'd come to power through such means himself, but had vowed to transition to democratic rule once security was established. Now it seemed that transition might be cut short. We need better intelligence, he decided. Instead of arresting those we suspect, we'll feed them controlled information. See where it leads, who reacts. Set up surveillance on all cabinet ministers, their deputies, and senior military officers. All of them, sir. asked Zungrana, surprised at the scope. All of them, Traoré confirmed. Including those in this room. If any of you are compromised, I need to know. He looked each of his trusted advisors in the eye. No one is beyond suspicion. Not even me. Over the next 3 weeks, Traoré's team implemented their counterintelligence strategy. They placed listening devices, monitored communications, and tracked movements of key officials. They deliberately leaked different versions of sensitive information to different ministers, creating a way to trace information leaks to their source. Meanwhile, Traoré maintained a facade of normalcy. He conducted official business, met with foreign diplomats, and visited military units in the field. But each night, he returned to the secure room to review the day's intelligence. The picture that emerged was disturbing. At least 8 ministers were actively working against his government, passing information to foreign handlers. Several more were compromised through blackmail or financial entanglements. Military commanders near the Mali and Niger borders were reporting troop movements to foreign intelligence services. And within the presidential security detail itself, 3 officers were implicated. It's a deep state in every sense, Traoré said grimly as he reviewed the evidence. Not just a few corrupt individuals, but an entire shadow system operating alongside our official government. The question is who controls it, said Major So. There's no single mastermind. Different factions serve different interests. The French network focuses on maintaining economic influence. The Americans want intelligence on jihadist movements. The Russians are cultivating military contacts. The Chinese protect their infrastructure investments. And they work against each other as often as they work together, added Captain Zungrana. What happened next changed everything. A secure communication was intercepted between Finance Minister Kone and an unknown contact using French diplomatic codes. The message was brief but alarming. Package ready. 72 hours. Confirm receipt. It could be innocent, suggested Captain Zungrana, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Maybe, Traoré replied, but combined with the other intelligence. I think we've run out of time. We need to move now. The plan was executed with military precision. At 3 a.m., trusted units of the Presidential Guard simultaneously arrested 15 high-ranking officials, including 6 cabinet ministers, 4 military officers, and 5 senior civil servants. Each was taken to separate secure locations for questioning. Their homes and offices were searched, computers seized, and documents confiscated. By dawn, rumors were spreading through Ouagadougou. By noon, international news agencies were reporting an internal purge in Burkina Faso's government. Traoré addressed the nation that evening, revealing limited information about the discovery of a network of corruption and foreign influence that threatened national sovereignty. While the public statements were measured, the private interrogations were intense. Most of the detained officials quickly implicated others, either to save themselves or because they genuinely knew only pieces of the network. Finance Minister Kone, however, remained defiant. You've made a grave mistake, Colonel, he said when Traoré personally questioned him. I serve Burkina Faso, as I have for 20 years under 4 different presidents. And how many of those presidents truly ruled? Traoré asked. How many were simply figureheads while people like you managed the country on behalf of foreign interests? Kone's expression flickered briefly but revealed nothing. You see conspiracies where there are only politics. The package you intercepted. Medical supplies for my wife. The French codes. I have family in Paris. You're creating enemies where you need allies. Perhaps, Traoré conceded, But then explain this. He placed a laptop before Kone showing financial transfers from a French corporation to an offshore account linked to the minister. This. A recording played of Kone speaking with someone at the French embassy about Traoré's planned visit to a northern military base. You don't understand international relations, Kone said dismissively. We need France. We need the West. Your predecessor learned that lesson too late. My predecessor was murdered by those who feared he would challenge that very assumption, Traoré replied coldly. I won't make his mistake of trusting too much. But neither will I make yours, of selling our sovereignty piece by piece. The interrogations continued for days. Some officials confessed fully, others partially. A few maintained their innocence despite evidence against them. Gradually, a clearer picture emerged of the deep state network, its structure, its methods, and most importantly, its vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Traoré faced intense international pressure. The French government expressed grave concern over the arrests. The American embassy requested consular access to several detainees who had connections to U.S. interests. The Economic Community of West African States (ECOWAS) called for respect for due process. They're showing their hands, Traoré told his inner circle. Each demand, each statement reveals another strand of the web. On the seventh day of the operation, Major Sao burst into Traoré's office without knocking. Sir, we've found something you need to see immediately. In a search of Interior Minister Kayelam's country house, soldiers had discovered a hidden room containing encrypted communications equipment and documents detailing what appeared to be contingency plans for removing Traoré from power. The plans included names of military units that could be relied upon, potential interim leaders, and even draft statements to be released to the international community. The most disturbing part, said Major So, is this section detailing psychological operations against you. They've been subtly manipulating information reaching you for months. Intelligence reports slightly altered, economic data modified, even manipulating which citizens you meet during public appearances. Traoré absorbed this silently. It explained much. The contradictory intelligence reports, the sense that something was always slightly off in the information he received. The deep state hadn't just been operating alongside his government, it had been actively working to shape his perception of reality. Bring Kayelam to me, he ordered. When the interior minister was brought in, he looked nothing like the confident official of cabinet meetings. Disheveled and haggard from a week in detention, he nevertheless maintained a certain dignity. Minister, Traoré said without preamble, we found your insurance policy. Kayelam said nothing for a long moment, then sighed deeply. It was never personal, Colonel. You must understand that. Explain it to me then. Traoré replied. Help me understand how betraying your country isn't personal. Burkina Faso has had 7 coups since independence, Kayelam said quietly. Presidents come and go. The deep state, as you call it, provides continuity. Stability. Without us, the country would collapse with each transition of power. And the foreign influences, the selling of our resources, our intelligence, our sovereignty. Kayelam spread his hands in a gesture of resignation. We're a landlocked country with few resources in one of the poorest regions on Earth. Sovereignty is a luxury we can't afford. We need foreign investment, foreign aid, foreign military support. The price for those things is influence. And when a leader tries to change that equation, Traoré asked, when someone like Thomas Sankara or myself tries to break free of those dependencies, then reality reasserts itself, Kayelam said simply. Colonel Sankara was brilliant, visionary. He was also dead within 4 years. The implied threat hung in the air between them. You're not the first to discover the network, Kayelem continued. Others have tried to dismantle it. Some were co-opted, some were removed. A few of the wiser ones learned to work within its constraints. And which fate did you plan for me? Kayelem smiled sadly. That would have depended on you, Colonel. But now, he gestured to his detention. Now I suspect none of us will have much choice in what happens next. Traoré leaned forward. You're wrong about one thing, Minister. We always have choices. And I choose to break this cycle, whatever the cost. The next phase of the operation was even more delicate than the arrests. With key members of the network identified and isolated, Traoré moved to dismantle its infrastructure while minimizing disruption to the government and military. Compromised officials were replaced with trusted officers and civilians vetted by Traoré's security team. Foreign diplomats implicated in the network were quietly declared persona non grata and asked to leave the country. Banking regulations were tightened to monitor suspicious financial flows. And perhaps most importantly, the architecture of government communication was rebuilt from the ground up to eliminate security vulnerabilities. Throughout, Traoré walked a diplomatic tightrope. He avoided directly accusing foreign governments of interference, speaking instead about external actors and foreign-influenced networks. He reached out to alternate partners, Turkey, India, Morocco, to reduce dependency on traditional power brokers like France and the United States. The international reaction was predictably hostile. Western media characterized the operation as a paranoid purge, and consolidation of dictatorial power. Financial markets grew nervous about Burkina Faso's stability, and several foreign companies suspended investment plans. The World Bank quietly delayed approval of pending loans. Economic warfare, Traoré observed grimly when informed of these developments. When direct intervention becomes too costly, they turn to financial pressure. But he had prepared for this too. Quiet negotiations with China and Gulf states provided alternative sources of investment. Regional allies like Mali and Niger, both similarly chafing under foreign influence, strengthened trade ties. And the discovery of new gold deposits provided a timely boost to government revenues. 6 weeks after the initial arrests, Traoré addressed the nation again. Standing before the National Assembly rather than in a military setting, he outlined what his government had uncovered. The networks we have exposed reach into every institution of our republic, he said, his voice firm. They operated in the shadows for decades, serving foreign interests while claiming to serve Burkina Faso. They corrupted our democracy, weakened our security, and sold our resources at prices beneficial to others but not to our people. He detailed specific examples. Military intelligence shared with foreign powers that compromised operations against terrorist groups. Economic agreements that provided minimal benefits to Burkina Faso while extracting maximum value from its resources. Diplomatic positions taken not in the national interest but to please foreign patrons. This was not the work of a few corrupt individuals, he emphasized. It was a system, a deep state network designed to ensure that no matter who you elected, no matter who held office, real power remained in the hands of those who could be controlled by outside interests. Then he made a move that surprised both his supporters and critics. He announced that all those detained would receive public trials with international observers present. We will not operate in the shadows as they did, he declared. Everything will be in the open. The evidence, the testimonies, the judgments. The people of Burkina Faso will see exactly how their country has been betrayed, and by whom. It was a calculated risk. Public trials meant public scrutiny, including of the methods used to gather evidence. It meant that some guilty parties might escape justice due to legal technicalities. But it also meant legitimacy, both domestically and internationally, that a secretive process would never achieve. The trials began 2 months later. Each day brought new revelations about the deep state network that had operated within Burkina Faso's government. Former ministers testified against each other, revealing chains of command that sometimes led directly to foreign embassies or corporations. Financial records showed millions of dollars flowing to officials in exchange for political influence. Intelligence documents detailed operations designed to maintain foreign control over Burkina Faso's resources and policies. International reaction evolved as the evidence mounted. Initial skepticism gave way to grudging acknowledgement that Traoré had uncovered something real. Several Western newspapers published investigative pieces examining similar networks in other African countries. The French government, while never admitting direct involvement, recalled several diplomatic staff implicated in testimony. For Traoré, however, the operation was never just about exposing the past, it was about securing the future. As the trials proceeded, he worked with a small team of trusted advisors to rebuild Burkina Faso's governing institutions with safeguards against foreign infiltration. "We need checks and balances that can't be easily corrupted," he told them. "Transparency mechanisms that expose attempts at undue influence. And most importantly, we need to build economic self-sufficiency so that we're negotiating from a position of strength, not desperation." The work was challenging, and progress often seemed slow. For every network they dismantled, another appeared in a different form. For every corrupt official they removed, another had to be vetted and trained. The deep state had spent decades establishing itself. It would not be eliminated overnight. 1 year after the initial arrests, Traoré stood again at the window of the presidential palace, watching the sun rise over Ouagadougou. The city looked much the same, but the country it represented was changing. Slowly, sometimes painfully, but changing nonetheless. Captain Zoungrana, now Major Zoungrana, entered with the morning security briefing. "Good news, sir. The operation in Dori was successful. We captured 3 terrorist leaders and recovered weapons caches. No leaks this time." Traoré nodded with satisfaction. 6 months earlier, a similar operation had been compromised because details had been passed to foreign intelligence agencies, which had their own complex relationships with some of the armed groups. And the economic reports? Also positive. Gold production is up 15% since we renegotiated the mining contracts. Agricultural exports have increased despite the drought. And the new partnership with Morocco on phosphate processing will create jobs in the north. Traoré allowed himself a small smile. Economic independence was the foundation of true sovereignty. Without it, political independence was merely symbolic. "Sir," Zoungrana continued with slight hesitation, "there's one more thing. Intelligence suggests that elements of the network are regrouping. Not here in Burkina Faso, but across the border in Côte d'Ivoire. Former officials who escaped the initial arrests, backed by foreign interests." Traoré's expression hardened. Of course, it wouldn't be that simple. The deep state was adaptable, patient. It would wait years if necessary for an opportunity to reassert control. "Keep monitoring the situation," he ordered. "But also reach out to our counterparts in Côte d'Ivoire. Not the official channels. Find officers there who understand what we're fighting against. This isn't just Burkina Faso's struggle." As Zoungrana left, Traoré turned back to the window. The sun had now fully risen, casting long shadows across the city. A fitting metaphor, he thought, for their current situation. Light was spreading, but shadows remained. The fight against the deep state would likely continue throughout his leadership and beyond. There would be victories and setbacks, moments of progress and periods of frustration. Foreign interests would not easily surrender their influence over African nations that they had controlled directly or indirectly for centuries. But something had changed. A precedent had been set. For perhaps the first time in Burkina Faso's history, the hidden networks of foreign control had been exposed to public view. The apparatus of the deep state had been damaged, its members forced into the open, its methods revealed. And most importantly, the people now understood what they were fighting against. Not just corruption or incompetence, but a sophisticated system designed specifically to prevent true independence. Knowledge was the first step toward liberation. Traoré picked up a small photograph from his desk. Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader assassinated in 1987. Sankara had also challenged foreign influence and paid with his life. But each generation built on the work of the last. Each pushed the boundaries of what was possible a little further. "We're not free yet," Traoré murmured to the photograph. "But we can see the path now." The deep state had been exposed. The networks were known. And in that knowledge lay the possibility of a truly sovereign future. Not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to FictionWire Africa. This is a fictional story created purely for entertainment.